The moment my father said, "She's not my daughter," the world went silent, but inside me, something shattered loud enough to last a lifetime. I remember standing there under the bright lights, the sound of applause fading into whispers, as if the crowd couldn't decide whether to pity me or praise him. He smiled, calm, proud, as though cutting me out of his life was another business decision. And my mother, she lowered her gaze, like she'd practiced that silence her whole life. People think betrayal comes with warning signs. It doesn't. It arrives dressed as respect, hidden behind years of obedience and forced smiles. I had spent my life defending his reputation, believing that love and loyalty would one day earn me a place in his heart. But all it earned me was humiliation, public and complete. That night, I walked away from the stage with my name stained, my heart empty, and one promise burning inside me. He may have denied me as his daughter, but one day, I'd make the world see who truly destroyed our family's name. When people looked at our family, they saw perfection, the Parkers, a picture of success and dignity. My father, Richard Parker, was known as a man of principle, my mother the graceful wife who hosted flawless dinner parties, and my brother Liam, the pride of his name. And then there was me, Alina, the quiet one who smiled too much, stayed polite, and never made anyone uncomfortable. Every Sunday evening, our family gathered around the oak dining table. My father liked his meals served at exactly 7. My mother would adjust the tablecloth one last time while whispering, "Smile, Alina. Appearances matter." Liam always arrived late, yet he was greeted with laughter and pride. When I once pointed it out, father said, "Liam has a demanding schedule. You should learn from his drive." That sentence, "You should learn from him," became the soundtrack of my youth. At every family function, I played the role of the invisible daughter, the one who smiled from behind the camera, who cleaned up after the celebration, who was expected to be grateful simply for being part of the Parker legacy. When guests arrived, father would introduce Liam as his brilliant son, mother as his rock, and me as Grace's helper. Not my daughter. Not even Alina. Just a nameless extension of my mother. I tried to earn my place. I graduated with honors, organized charity drives, and represented our family name at community events. But the more I tried to make him proud, the more distant he became. He didn't like the attention I was getting, especially when people began to call me the Parker daughter with a heart. To him, success was only admirable if it came through his control. I still remember one winter night. Liam had failed an important deal at the company. Father was furious, until I quietly fixed the issue, saving the project by sending the correct files. The next morning, I overheard him boasting, "My son handled the crisis perfectly." And my mother just looked at me with that same soft helplessness, the one that said, "Don't argue, Alina. It's not worth it." But it was worth it, because every act of silence was teaching me who I was to them. Useful, but never enough. Still, I kept believing love was earned, not given. I told myself if I just stayed respectful, if I just stayed good, he'd finally see me. But beneath that calm, polite smile, something inside me had already started to rot, a quiet anger growing under years of obedience. Then, one evening during a family dinner, father received a message, looked at me sharply, and his jaw tightened. Liam's smirk said it all. Something was coming. That was the first night I realized the cracks in our perfect family weren't just emotional. They were dangerous. It started with a meeting I wasn't supposed to attend. Father had called a family discussion about the future of Parker Industries, the company he'd built and ruled with his iron pride. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard him say, "Everything will go to Liam when I retire. It's only right, he's my legacy." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. My heart dropped, but I kept listening. My mother's soft voice followed, cautious as always. "Richard, what about Alina? She's done more for the community branch than anyone." Father's answer was a cold chuckle. "She's emotional, Grace. Not business-minded. I need someone who understands strategy, not sympathy." His words sliced deeper than I expected. Emotional. That's what he always called me, as if kindness was a weakness, not a strength. When I entered the room, they fell silent. I looked straight at him. "Did you just decide my worth without me?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside. He didn't even look ashamed. "Don't take things personally, Alina. This is family business." "Family?" I repeated, forcing a small laugh. "You mean Liam's business?" Liam smirked from across the room, leaning back like a king in his chair. Maybe if you actually worked for the company instead of playing charity girl, Dad would see your potential. The mockery in his tone burned. He wanted me humiliated. Again. The days that followed only got worse. Father started excluding me from public events. Invitations that once had Parker family written on them were suddenly addressed to Richard and Liam Parker. When I asked about it, he brushed it off. You've been getting too much attention lately. It's better this way. Too much attention. He couldn't stand that I was being seen, not as his daughter, but as a woman capable of standing on her own. At dinner, he'd speak endlessly about Liam's vision, his leadership, his strength. I'd sit there, silent, cutting my food into smaller and smaller pieces just to stop my hands from shaking. One evening, I tried to join the conversation, to talk about a youth program I'd started under the family's name. Before I could finish, Father interrupted. Don't embarrass yourself, Alina. Stick to small projects, things you can handle. The table fell quiet. Liam's smirk widened. My mother's eyes begged me not to react. But that night, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I followed Father into his study after dinner. Why do you keep pushing me out? I demanded. What did I ever do to deserve this? He didn't even glance up from his papers. You were born second, he said simply. Those 4 words froze everything inside me. Born second, as if my existence was an inconvenience. I left his office trembling, every step echoing like a reminder that I would never belong in his world of pride and power. The next morning, Aunt Meredith called. She loved gossip more than truth. Her tone was smug. So, dear, I heard your father finally made the decision. Liam's the heir. You must feel relieved. Responsibility isn't for everyone. I hung up before she could finish. Something in me snapped that day, not out of hate, but out of realization. They didn't see me as weak because I lacked power. They saw me as dangerous because I had integrity, something they couldn't control. But the real blow came a week later, when I attended a charity event under my name. Reporters asked Father about my work. He smiled and said, She means well, but she's not part of the Parker business. She's just doing her own thing. In front of cameras. In front of everyone. He stripped me of belonging. Again. That was the moment I stopped trying to earn his approval. Because deep down, I realized something he would never admit. He wasn't protecting the family's name. He was protecting his lies. After that charity event, something inside me changed. Not instantly, but like a slow fire spreading under calm ashes. I stopped trying to win my father's approval. Yet somehow, that only made his contempt grow louder. It started with small things that seemed harmless to outsiders but cut deep in silence. My father would forget to invite me to family meetings, yet mention them at dinner with a smirk. Liam would leave my name off company brochures, claiming it was an oversight. My mother noticed but never spoke up. She had learned long ago that peace in our house came at the price of truth. At a family luncheon one afternoon, the humiliation became public. Father was seated beside a senator, bragging about Liam's new business deal. When the senator turned to me and said, "You must be so proud of your daughter's community project," Father laughed, actually laughed, and replied, Alina keeps herself busy with emotional things. We let her have her little passions." The table erupted in polite chuckles. I smiled tightly, my throat burning. My mother's fork froze mid-air. Liam whispered, "Don't take it to heart, sis. Dad's just being honest." That day, I excused myself from the table and walked to the washroom. I didn't cry. I just looked in the mirror and whispered, "You will not break here." Because I knew that's exactly what he wanted, to see me crushed, silent, invisible again. But the disrespect didn't end there. At Liam's engagement dinner, I wasn't seated with the family. My place card was at the far end of the hall, next to the caterer's station. Father told me it was a mix-up, but the pitying looks from guests told another story. When Liam gave his toast, he thanked everyone, every single relative, even distant cousins, except me. When I confronted him later, he shrugged. "You're not really involved in the family business, Alina." It didn't seem relevant. Something in his voice, that cold confidence, reminded me too much of Father. That's when I realized Liam wasn't just following in his footsteps. He was practicing cruelty like it was an inheritance. My patience, once my pride, started to feel like weakness. A week later, I hosted a small community event, something I'd planned for months to raise funds for underprivileged children. It was my passion project, one I hoped might finally make father proud. He promised he'd attend. I believed him. He arrived halfway through, but not to support me. He came with reporters, cameras flashing, ready to take credit for the initiative. "It's good to see our company's daughter doing something valuable," he told them, as if the idea had been his. He posed for pictures beside me, hand on my shoulder, his smile a mask of perfection. But the moment the cameras turned off, he muttered under his breath, "Don't make this about you, Alina. You wouldn't even have a platform if it weren't for me." That was the first time I felt hatred, cold, controlled, and terrifyingly calm. That night, I sat alone in my car, staring at the photographs already flooding social media. People congratulated my father, not me. His reputation shone brighter than ever, built on my work, my effort, my silence. And for the first time, I realized silence wasn't grace. It was surrender. Then came the phone call. It was Aunt Meredith, her voice thick with amusement. "Your father's planning something big for the company's anniversary gala. You might want to stay home this time, dear. He says it's going to be memorable." I hung up, heart pounding. Something in her tone told me this wasn't another humiliation, it was a setup. And whatever he was planning next, it was meant to destroy me completely. The night of the Parker Industries anniversary gala was supposed to celebrate 50 years of family legacy. Father made sure every newspaper covered it, every politician attended, and every camera stayed on him. I wasn't planning to go. After Aunt Meredith's warning, I wanted no part of his show. But Mother insisted. "Please, Alina," she begged softly. "Whatever your father has planned, face it with dignity. Don't let him say you ran away." So I went, not out of hope, but out of defiance. The ballroom glittered with gold chandeliers and expensive lies. Father stood at the center, shaking hands and accepting congratulations as if he were royalty. Liam hovered beside him, polished and smug, wearing the same self-satisfied grin I'd grown to despise. When Father saw me enter, his smile flickered, just for a moment, before he turned to the cameras. "Ah, the whole family's here," he said, voice smooth as glass. "Well, almost whole." The laughter that followed was light, but it stung like acid. I found a quiet corner, pretending to study the paintings, trying to disappear. That's when I noticed reporters whispering, flipping through printed documents. A low murmur rippled through the room. Something was happening, something I hadn't been told. Then, with deliberate slowness, Father stepped onto the stage. The microphone hummed as he spoke. "Tonight isn't just about our company's success," he began. "It's about the values that built it, honesty, discipline, and family." I almost laughed at the irony. But then, his tone shifted. "Unfortunately," he continued, "some members of this family have failed to uphold those values." The room went still. My breath caught. "As many of you know," he went on, "our charitable branch has recently faced an inquiry. And sadly, it was traced back to misuse of funds, under the supervision of my daughter, Alina." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. Then the murmurs began. Sharp, accusing, poisonous. Faces turned toward me, eyes narrowing in judgment. He had forged the documents. I knew it instantly. Those papers I'd signed months ago for charity accounts, the ones he insisted on reviewing personally. He'd twisted them into proof of corruption. My legs went numb. "No," I whispered, stepping forward. "That's not true." But the microphones had already captured his version. Cameras were flashing. My voice drowned under the weight of his authority. Liam stepped closer to the stage, pretending concern. "Dad, maybe this isn't the time." Father silenced him with a raised hand, his expression solemn and righteous. "Integrity must come before sentiment," he said, staring directly at me. "I can't protect her any longer." The audience gasped, but he didn't stop there. He turned to the board members and declared, "Effective immediately, Alina Parker will no longer represent Parker Industries in any capacity." That was it. My public execution. My name, erased in one breath. I don't remember walking out of that hall. I remember only the sound of applause, polite, hesitant, but real, as if the audience was clapping for the justice he claimed to deliver. Outside, the night air hit me like glass. My mother followed, trembling. "Alina, please." But I couldn't look at her. "You knew," I said quietly. "Didn't you?" Her tears answered for her. I drove home alone, my reflection in the rearview mirror blurred by tears I refused to wipe away. The silence in my apartment felt heavier than the crowd's whispers. My phone buzzed with messages, reporters demanding statements, friends sending sympathy that sounded like pity. I sat there until sunrise, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of every year I'd spent trying to please a man who never wanted me. He hadn't just humiliated me, he'd destroyed my name, my credibility, my identity. For the first time, I understood what it meant to truly be alone. But as the light crept through the blinds, my grief began to change shape. It hardened, like steel cooling after fire. Every tear dried into resolve. Every memory of his cruelty turned into a weapon. I replayed his words in my head, integrity must come before sentiment. He was right, but not in the way he thought. Integrity would come before sentiment. Mine would expose his. That morning, I opened my laptop. I searched for the old charity records, the ones he thought I deleted. I still had copies. Dates. Transfers. Emails. Proof. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from power. He had denied me as his daughter. He had stripped me of dignity. But he had forgotten one thing. I was his reflection, and I knew exactly how to destroy the image he worshipped. That was the moment my revenge was born, not out of hate, but out of justice. And in that quiet sunrise, I whispered to myself, he took my name from the world, now I'll take his mask from it. The daughter he disowned was gone. The woman he created by betrayal. She had just begun to rise. Grief is heavy, but anger is useful. I learned that in the cold light after the gala, when the humiliation had been catalogued by headlines and my hand still shook with a new kind of purpose. I could feel two versions of myself. The girl who had always wanted her father's approval, and a woman who no longer needed it. The second one was hungry for truth. The first thing I did was gather what I already owned. Not things, but evidence. Old emails, charity receipts, bank statements I'd kept months before he reviewed them. I remembered small details. The exact phrasing of his edits, the way he'd asked me to sign papers for formality. Those memories became my map. I copied everything to a secure drive and hid it at a friend's office, the kind of place where no Parker could reach without asking questions. I also began to talk, carefully. Mrs. Evans, who'd handled accounts for the family years ago, took my call like a lifeline. Her voice trembled when she said, I always suspected he moved things behind closed doors. She offered names, dates, a ledger she'd kept in secret. Grace, my mother, finally admitted what she'd only hinted. He's been carrying lies like trophies. Her confession cost her tears and something like relief. It cost me everything else, the illusion that I had no allies. I learned to use other people's arrogance against them. Liam liked public praise. He loved cameras. If I could expose his dependence on Father's shadow, the cracks in their performance would widen. I reached out to a former junior accountant at Parker Industries, a quiet woman who'd been dismissed after asking too many questions. She agreed to meet me in a coffee shop, hands shaking as she slid a folder across the table. Inside, transfer records, internal memos, an approval stamp that didn't belong where my father claimed it did. Emotionally, I trained myself to be precise. Where I had once reacted with heat, I now answered with ice. I practiced my voice until it sounded calm in interviews and firm in confrontations. I rehearsed how I would speak to the press, to lawyers, to the board, not as a desperate daughter, but as a claimant of truth. I'll show what he hid, I told myself in the mirror, not as a promise but as a command. Practical steps came next. I consulted a small, principled lawyer who took cases nobody else wanted, the kind who smelled trouble and stayed. We built a timeline from fragmented papers, subpoenaed records I couldn't access alone, and prepared formal complaints that would be impossible for the board to ignore. I learned legal terms I'd never imagined needing: fiduciary duty, embezzlement, conflict of interest. Each new phrase tightened the net we were weaving. But revenge isn't only about documents. It's about removing the stage where his lies look true. I began to cultivate public support, not through spectacle, but through story. I quietly met with a journalist who had covered nonprofit fraud before and trusted her with an outline of what I could prove. She listened, not with pity but with the hunger of someone who loves the truth. Even with allies and papers, doubt crept in like a small, cold animal. What if I failed? What if my mother paid the price? What if the world believed him because he was louder? At night I would sit on my floor and whisper into the dark, if I do this, there's no going back. But every memory of his laughter at my disgrace hardened my resolve. I wanted justice, not ruin for the innocent. I wanted the truth to stand where his lies had stood for so long. The plan was set: records, witnesses, legal pressure, and a journalist ready to run the story. I had turned pain into strategy, heartbreak into a method. Standing on the edge of the thing I had built, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: a steady, dangerous calm. I packed the last folder into my bag, pressed my hand to the old photograph of my father on the mantel, and whispered, "This is for the truth." Then I walked out the door toward the moment he had tried to script, and toward the moment I would rewrite. The night of the confrontation arrived cloaked in the illusion of civility: polished glasses, expensive smiles, and the faint scent of deceit lingering like cologne. The family had gathered in the grand dining hall for what father called a private announcement. Everyone assumed it was to formalize the inheritance distribution, the one that had quietly cut me out months ago. I walked in last, every step deliberate, heels echoing against marble floors that once felt like home. Eyes turned, some curious, others irritated. Liam's smirk arrived before his words. "Didn't think you'd show your face here again," he muttered, loud enough for the laughter around the table to ripple. I smiled. Not the smile they remembered, but one sharpened by silence and survival. "I wouldn't miss family night," I replied. Father sat at the head of the table, his silver cufflinks gleaming like trophies. "Let's begin," he said, voice steady but wary. "It's time to settle things properly." I sat opposite him, a folder on the table before me, plain, unassuming, and heavier than gold. He began his speech, practiced and polished, full of words like legacy, trust, and family unity. He spoke of fairness, of balance, of what each child deserved. Liam grinned, my stepmother adjusted her bracelet, and the lawyer beside father nodded dutifully. I waited until he said it, and as for my daughter, the pause, the calculated sympathy. "She has chosen her own path. I wish her the best, but the estate will remain within responsible hands." A silence followed, long and thick. Everyone knew what it meant. Exile wrapped in politeness. I reached for the folder. "Responsible hands," I repeated softly. "Interesting choice of words, father." His eyes narrowed. "This isn't the time, nor the place." "Oh, I think it's exactly the time." The lawyer tried to interject, but I opened the folder and slid a set of documents across the table: bank transfers, emails, the ledger from Mrs. Evans, stamped and dated. "These," I said, "belong to Parker Industries. Transfers under your signature, funds that never reach the charities you claim to support." The air changed instantly, from smug to stunned. Liam's laughter faltered. "You're bluffing." I looked at him, calm and deliberate. "You'd no bluffing, Liam. It's the only thing you've inherited without paperwork." Gasps rippled around the table. My mother, pale and trembling, pressed a hand to her mouth. "You said." "I said we'd talk later," I interrupted gently. "But it turns out the truth doesn't like waiting." Father stood, voice low and cold. "You dare accuse me?" "I don't accuse," I said, rising to meet him eye to eye. "I expose." From the corner of the room, a flash, the journalist's camera, discreet but powerful. She'd been invited as a family friend, but her lens was capturing every word, every trembling expression. Father's composure cracked for the first time in my life. "You planned this?" "Yes," I said. "For once, I planned something." Liam slammed his fist against the table. "You'll ruin us." "No," I whispered, leaning forward. "You already did. I'm just showing the world what you built." The lawyer stammered. "Miss Parker, you can't." "Oh, I can," I said, sliding another document forward. A signed statement from the accountant, the board's own internal audit, and the journalist's recording device blinking red. "I made sure the story goes live in 10 minutes. Unless you'd like to call a press conference instead." The silence that followed was symphonic, the sound of power collapsing. Father sank back into his chair, defeated eyes fixed on the papers that had once been his weapon. The hands that had dictated every decision for years now trembled like those of a guilty man caught in daylight. My voice softened. "All I ever wanted was to be seen. You could have given me truth instead of lies." He looked up, eyes glassy with something between rage and regret. "You've destroyed the family name." "No," I said, gathering my papers. "I've set it free from yours." The journalist's phone buzzed, The story had gone live. A notification blinked on every device in the room. Parker Foundation under investigation for fraud and forgery. Liam's face turned white. My stepmother whispered something about leaving the country. My mother, silent and tearful, met my gaze, and for the first time, didn't look away. I turned to the door, pausing only once to look back. Father was still seated, staring at the empire that was no longer his. You once told me truth destroys families, I said quietly. You were right. But lies destroy souls. And with that, I walked out into the night, the sound of chaos rising behind me, and for the first time in years, the feeling of air that belonged entirely to me. The war was over. The truth had spoken. The morning after the storm was eerily quiet. No shouting, no accusations, no ringing phones, just silence. The kind that comes after years of noise and deception finally collapse under their own weight. News of the Parker scandal spread like wildfire. Within hours, the headlines replaced every portrait of perfection my father had carefully crafted. Philanthropist Richard Parker under investigation for fraud. Parker Industries faces collapse after exposure. The empire that once looked unshakable was now being dismantled, piece by piece, by the same truth they had tried so hard to bury. I watched from a distance, standing by the lake behind our old house, the same lake where I used to sit as a child, tossing pebbles and wondering what made love so conditional. The air was cold, but it felt clean. I could finally breathe. My phone buzzed relentlessly with messages, reporters, board members, even distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years. I ignored them all. For once, silence was a choice, not a punishment. My mother came to see me that afternoon. She looked smaller somehow, her elegance replaced by exhaustion. For a long time, we just stood there, the lake between us and the memories we could never rewrite. I never wanted this for you, she whispered. I know, I said gently. But you also never stopped it. Her eyes filled with tears. He'll lose everything. He already did, I replied. The moment he lost his conscience. She nodded, unable to argue. There was no victory in my voice, no gloating. Just truth, the kind that doesn't scream, only stands still and refuses to move. As she left, I stayed by the water, thinking about all the years I had wasted chasing validation from people who only loved reflections of themselves. The realization hurt, but it also healed. Because I finally understood that being unloved by the wrong people doesn't make you unworthy. In the days that followed, I rebuilt quietly. I joined a nonprofit I once volunteered for, one that actually helped the communities my father only used for publicity. People still whispered when they saw my name, but I didn't mind. Let them. Every whisper was proof that the truth had echoed louder than any lie ever could. Liam left the country to rebuild his life. My father retreated into isolation, refusing interviews, refusing apologies. My stepmother sold her jewelry, my mother moved to a small cottage far from the city. The Parker mansion, once a monument to pride, stood empty, a hollow monument to everything they had worshipped. One evening, a journalist asked me if I felt triumphant. I smiled faintly. No, I said. Truth isn't about winning. It's about ending what should have never begun. He asked me what I learned through it all, and I gave him the only answer that ever mattered. You can lose your family, your money, even your name, but if you still have your dignity, you've lost nothing that can't be rebuilt. The interview ended there. As I walked away that night, city lights reflecting on the wet pavement, I felt a strange peace, not the absence of pain, but the presence of clarity. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I wasn't defined by their silence, or their rejection. I was simply me, whole, flawed, and finally free. The world had tried to measure my worth by how much I was loved. But I had learned the truth. Dignity isn't given by others. It's reclaimed the moment you stop begging for it.